Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Link right here in the description. Bypass the Apple upcharge, get access to 10 different channels. This is where you want to talk heat. The most heat anywhere. That's conversation, information, and more. Get away from Twitter. We put everything good on Twitter about the Heat. Well, not good or bad, okay, about the Heat, but everything that's relevant to talk about, we put it here anyway. So you can check it all out in one organized place. We organize it by channel. Appreciate our guys, Eternal and Sean, for doing all that stuff for us. And again, once you get in there, it's like your family with a bunch of Heat fans, most of whom are frustrated most of the time. But again, at least it's good conversation. Check it out. It's Off the Floor. Link right here in the description. Also, check out Prize Picks. Use the code 5, FIVE. Throughout the NBA Finals, we'll be running contests. So make sure you sign up using the code 5. You have to be signed up with that. Not only you get $50 to play, but you get an extra $20 potentially off of every finals game. So check it out, prizepicks.com. Use the code FIVE. And now, today's episode.
Mercy, luxurious, Heat Nation, yeah, Mercy and Lago, down to Biscayne, yay, five on the floor, ride for my dogs, where here's the thing, you can check the score, hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs, down to Biscayne. Kept the flow playing, got it all band. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, it's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. We're going to treat this a little bit like a prize picks for salaries. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at Five Reasons Sports. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow me at Greg Sylvander. Miami Heats have some financial. Miami Heats. It's so frustrating that it's not a plural nickname. By the way, Greg, I worked at the 3 newspapers in town, and they all treated this differently. So at the Miami Herald, and it just always confused me on deadline again because I was like the Patrick Beverly of Miami sports writers. It was just one team 1 year, one team another year, or maybe more like Dennis Schroeder. Okay, it was more like Dennis Schroeder. So when I was at the Miami Herald, it was an is. The Miami Heat is. When I was at the Sun Sentinel, it was a Miami Heat are, and then they changed it to a Miami Heat is. I believe Ira would know better than I because he's had to write it over and over. And at the Palm Beach Post, it was a Miami Heat are. So I don't know from minute to minute if the Miami Heat are, if they is what they are what they is. I'm not really sure. But we're going to do up downs on this for Miami Heat players. They do have some financial decisions to make. They have some decisions that are out of their hands. Terry Rozier will make roughly $24 billion this year. Didn't earn some incentives from last season. He's in the last year of his contract. Of course, he will get paid. Duncan Robinson, they don't have to be the ones to pay him because they may end up trading him, but he's got a partial guarantee. So they don't have a choice on him. Bam, we know what he's going to get. Andrew Wiggins, we know what he's going to get. Kyle Anderson, we know what he's going to get. Kevin Love, we know what he's going to get. So some of these stuff is baked in. If the players are here, the Heat are going to pay them. There's a decision to be made about Davion Mitchell. There's a decision to be made about Nikola Jovic, but again, it doesn't affect his salary this year, but going forward. And there's a decision to be made about Tyler Herro, which doesn't affect him this year or going forward. So we've touched on all these players separately in separate episodes, and some of this I've done with other hosts. But we're gonna come up with a number here. So I'll throw this one at you. Let's start with Davion Mitchell. There is some speculation that he could get as much as $14 million a year. Now, and Anthony Chang, I think, put that out in the Herald. I'm always skeptical of these numbers because these numbers are pushed out there by agents who are trying to attract a crowd. But also, there are times that I'm told certain things and I'm like, that'll never happen, and it ends up happening. Max Strus is the best example. It was actually Jimmy Butler's agent who said to me during Max's last year, he's going to get like $60 million. And as much as I like Max, I'm like, really? I remember mentioning that to you guys, that I had heard this. The max was going to get that kind of money. And what did he get? 63? I mean, he ended up getting that projection. And again, I like Max as a person, like Max as a player, but the Heat decided, I think, at that point they couldn't do it and wash their hands of the situation. Wish Max well. Caleb, we speculated about what his number was going to be. The Heat blew away that number, but his agent didn't take it, and then came back 24 hours later trying to take it, and he ended up getting less than half the amount of money. Gabe Vincent, I think we had about right, but he was insulted, or his agent was insulted by the Heat's initial offer, and even though they raised it, he ended up going back home to Southern California. So the Davion Mitchell thing at $14 million. If I was to say to you that the Heat could get him at $12 million per, so say whether they negotiated with him or they match a restricted free agency offer to him, $12 million per, let's say at 3 years. Are you signing that deal if you're the Heat, or are you having him sign that deal?
Hell yeah, yeah. Like I think that it's interesting because like you mentioned, the scuttle about Max getting the money that he got, and then he ended up getting that kind of bag. It's been the opposite with Davion Mitchell. Like most people, and I guess there's been, some speculation to your point, Anthony Chang mentioned in the Herald, he could get a mid-level. I mean, like that's what he's fishing for, which is around 14 million, right? But I think that a lot of people are weary of the way that Miami maximizes guys. Davion Mitchell was also playing for a contract. And so also, I think there's a chance that nobody tries to go quite to the full mid-level exception, quite for the full 4 years or whatever it can be. And so the Heat are going to have the opportunity to come in around 12 and a half. I say absolutely. That's a type of salary for a player that can be, in my opinion, Davion Mitchell can be part of an 8-man rotation that can win a championship. I think he's that good. He may not be the starting guard, but he can be like the backup guard for sure of a championship core. So I think it's worth it. I would say yes to 12 and a half million.
Well, and if you think he can be that, TJ McConnell may end up being, that guard on a championship team, as might Alex Caruso. So if you're saying, a guard who provides a little bit of everything, in Davion's case, he's closer to the defender that Caruso is, isn't quite the pest offensively, maybe that O'Connell, that TJ McConnell, I want to do that. TJ McConnell is, but yes, I'm with you on that. 14 for me is a little rich, but I don't think that's what it's going to. I don't think that's what it's going to be.
Agreed.
I don't.
I think it'd make them blink. I think, to your point,
right,
and I won't cut you off for long, if somebody offered a fully guaranteed 4-year full mid-level exception deal, I think that's where the Heat probably start to think about the blink scenario.
And it's crazy because when it comes to stars, we don't blink for an extra $5 million a year, right? It's what it takes to get a star. It's sort of like when you're buying a car, and it's a car that you really want, and it's going to cost you an extra $3 or $4 grand. You're like, whatever. But then, you're at, let me use an example here. You're at McDonald's, okay, and they've raised the price on a Big Mac by 38 cents, and you're like, I don't really want to pay this. I'll just, maybe Burger King down the street can get me something cheap, or gas goes up 20 cents, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go to the station. It's funny how we do this. I'm $1 million or $2 million in the grand scheme of things isn't going to make or break a franchise. And we saw this at a much larger scale with James Harden. They made a decision in Oklahoma City not to pay him an extra $3 million a year. And if they had paid him, as much as I'm not a Harden guy, if they had paid him, they probably would have had a couple of championships during that run instead of this run, but they didn't. Now, I don't think paying or not paying Davion Mitchell is going to be the difference between winning a championship or not anytime soon. But I guess I could be talked into the 14 million if they have other ways to get around it, because $1 million or $2 million, but it would make me blink a little bit. And I'd be like, okay, wait, is he going to be maximized on this roster enough where he's worth $14 million to them? I think if it's in the 10 to 12 range, former first round pick, fits your system, you just do it. I think they're prepared to do it in that range. But yeah, I think the 14 million gets a little bit dicey. All right, before we get to the break here, because we're going to talk about the other rule. I know what everybody wants us to talk about. We talked about it a million times, but let's get into Jovic here. So the projections on him now are what? 4 for 55? Is that what's been out there?
I tuned into the Game Theory podcast, which is a great show, specifically as we head towards the draft, headed up by Sam Viceni. And they were kind of going through Miami's offseason. They do like, every team gets an episode, and they devoted a section of that episode to Jovic because he is extension eligible. So for everyone, just to level set expectations, he's not a free agent now. They don't technically have to make this decision right now. They could say, play the season out, go get an offer from someone, and they could have the ability to match it, right? But they also could get ahead of it, and they could offer him an extension now. The question is, if you offered, like you said, and this is where Sam Viceni came in, they were kind of like analyzing what would the market value be. 4 for 55 is just under this $14 million per like mid-level salary, right? You'd have to ask, is Jovic going to ascend in the next 3 to 4 years to the degree where he is worth more than a mid-level exception? And if you think so, get ahead of it and get him at 13.25 million or 13.75, whatever it is. So that's the market. I actually think that that's inflated. Like I was, when I heard that, I was surprised that they went that high. To me, I don't think that the interest would be that widespread throughout the league. But I also, and Brian Fonseca, who's been the as much as Eternal wants to be the Niko Jovic guy, Brian was first to that. He doesn't know that like there's enough teams out there that would be willing to offer that big money to a guy who hasn't really proven stuff yet. I don't know that like contenders are looking for teams that can like be the missing piece. Is Nico a missing piece guy? I don't know if I get that vibe. So to me, 4 for 55 is what was spread on the internet and on the podcast, wavelengths, but I think it's a little rich. I don't think he gets that much.
I just don't know what his leverage is at this point. That's my thing. And I like the player a lot. I mean, I like him as a player and a person. And I think he's going to be a very good NBA player if he finds the right system. And it may be Miami, and it may not be, because a lot of his strengths don't play to Miami's strengths. Like Davion's strengths play directly to Miami's strengths. Jovic is the type of player that was supposed to change Miami's strengths.
If he's transformative.
But he's been put in these weird positions where it's like he's starting, he's not starting. The ball's in his hands. No, he's just standing at the 3-point line. He's really good in transition. They're not good in transition. And I know the points per possession are going to say differently, but my eye test, I'm going with eye test on this one. They're not good in transition. So that's my question with him is, how does he sell to another team? And I'm not sure he wants to go anywhere, by the way. He's indicated pretty repeatedly he wants to be here. And I'd like to have him here. I think he's gonna has a chance to be a really good player. I don't think he's gonna be a busted first round pick. But I also don't see how other teams are gonna look at it. Like he's the type of player that another team would acquire and say, this is an under the radar guy. Exactly. Like pick late in the first round, but we think we can get something out of him. So I don't know where the leverage is going to be for him to get 4 for 55. I thought that number was high. I think at this stage, he's a $10 million player with room to grow. I'm not saying I wouldn't give him 4 for 55, but I would look to move him if that's the case. Honestly, I don't think that they're going to get the most out of him with where they are. I mean, what is his role? Honestly, like what is his role if Ware and Bam are starting? Is he the sixth man?
Yeah, like basically he's if you think about it, kind of the connective tissue in off the bench from the front court, but able to kind of handle the ball. So he's kind of in this hybrid role. I don't want to pigeonhole him into one position because he's really one of those guys that flips the entire idea of positions on its head. But it would completely mean, like, for them to maximize Nico at a point where he would be making above, like, let's say he gets 4 for 55, which we both think is high, right? For him to really for that to pay off for Miami, they would have to almost scrap parts of their system, it feels like.
Right.
And like maybe some of their players would have to change. So it's like it's a deeper dive on what's supplementing around Nico. And then the question is like, can you really beg the question of, are we building around Nico? Like what's around him? You can't really ask that question because you have to ask bigger questions before you get to that question. So it's a weird spot that they're in. And it's why I think they'll ultimately tell him, look, last year you got a chance to start. We tried to figure out a role. I think it's probably best that you play out this season. We will get something done with you. We want you here, but we're not going to offer you anything now. And I don't see where he is going to be, there's nothing he can do but really just play into that. But yeah, it's an interesting scenario because this is where also it gives me pause. And I know we're going to pivot here to the larger point of this. If Nico were to leave, whether that be via free agency or you trade him and it just doesn't work out, Jaquez had a weird year. So now we're trying to figure out what Jaquez is. You can't have multiple years of your first round picks just like dropping like flies in terms of building blocks. Maybe not cornerstone building blocks, but like some of the blocks that like connect some of the cornerstones. So like you can't just have all of those drop like flies. And I know Ware looks like he's ascending, but Jaquez is in a weird spot. Nico, what do you really have? These are questions you have to answer. And now the bill's coming. You got to pay the guy.
Right. And that's why it's why they had to accelerate his development a little bit. And they have certainly in a physical standpoint. I mean, they have. And defensively, he got better too. Are you playing him at the 3? I mean, I know Sean's going to get mad at me for talking about positions here, but is it point Jovic? Like, what are you doing to get him the minutes and the role to make him worth the money? That's where I'm at. Because if you're leaning heavily into Bam and Ware, Jovic to me looked like a perfect fit next to Bam if Bam was playing the 5. Now you're going a different direction, so I'm not exactly sure. I think if you can get him for $10 million a year in extension, you take it. You don't want to burn the first round pick. You try to find the role for him. I think if you're talking about what is that, 455 or looking at closer to $14 million a year, it's kind of the same conversation we're having about Davion. All right, but again, Davion fits the system. That we know. Jovic I think has higher upside than Davion, but Davion fits exactly what they do. I will briefly get into the Tyler thing on the other side of this. Before we do, want to mention Cousins USA. You can find them at cousinsusa.com/5RSN. Your movers, you live in Broward County, for sure reach out to them. You can see, look, it's the Hard Rock right in the background there. 888-300-6683. That's 888-300-6683. cousinsusa.com/5RSN. You get free wardrobe boxes there if you go to that link. They do a great job for you. They've got people working for them for the last 20, 25 years. Okay, that tells you the kind of loyalty that they have. It's a family business. They say, our family moving yours. Check them out again at cousinsusa.com/5RSN. All right, we've devoted so many episodes to this, but I felt like I needed to include him. You know my feelings on the Tyler extension, that all maxes are not created equal. And Riley kind of alluded to that in his end-of-year press conference. Teams are starting to draw the line on these maxes for guys who are not superstars. Tyler is a star. I think it's legitimate to say that. He's not a superstar because superstars are impact players both ways. We're just hoping Tyler can get to par defensively so that we can just focus on the offensive stuff. And at times this year he did. And off the ball, I think he's improved greatly. But he's still the player that's going to be targeted the most by other teams. And a lot of it is not stuff he can really get better at. It's just physical limitations at this level. I have kind of put the number, if it's going to be this year. I know Tyler said he was okay waiting until next year. Certainly the Heat are in no hurry. I've kind of said 3 for 110. I'd be comfortable with that. I think if you could get that deal done and you have a guard who can get you 25 on pretty damn good efficiency, get you assists, get you rebounds, has made big shots, even though we know the clutch numbers overall have not been great. I think if you can get him for 3 for 110, I think you celebrate that contract, you move forward with him. It's also movable in the future if you need to do that. I think when you start getting north of that, it gets complicated. 40 is the absolute most that I would do. And that's my, but you start getting into the 40s or you're getting close to 50, then I think we're having a different conversation.
This is where it gets interesting. And we probably should we're going to devote more time to this topic because, like, you're right. Like, we were haggling in the front half of this episode about a couple $1 million here or there on Davion Mitchell or on Nico, right? None of that's going to completely like throw your salary cap sheet off balance, right? Tyler Herro at a full, like, let's look at Tyrese Maxey's deal. It's 5 years, $204 million. You'd give something like that to Tyler, and he's not necessarily that player. And I don't know if Tyrese Maxey's that player. I'm going to just sneak that in here while we're here. You could completely get in a situation where you're paralyzed and you have a ceiling, and that's a tough spot to be in because, like we talked about in other episodes, like Tyler and Bam are kind of both like twos, Bam being a higher end two than Tyler is. So you're in a weird spot there. I think, though, Ethan, you're like the 110, 3 years, 110. That's too team friendly. I mean, I hope that gets done. I don't think that there's a way that Tyler's going to look at the market, look at the way that the cap is increasing and what his percent of the total cap will be. He's going to try to get north of 40 million. And I don't think the conversation even begins from his representation.
Do you think he bets? Do you think then, if that's the case, that then he does bet on himself? Because he's bet on himself before in a variety of different ways. If the Heat are not going to go north of 40 at this point, and I'm not even saying negotiations have begun, but if they start to have, because we talked about, they would have had conversations with Jimmy about an extension if he just would have allowed it to get there. He didn't. But Tyler is obviously more of a team guy than Jimmy is, no question about that. He's already said all the right things about this. I thought he gave an answer that Pat would love, okay, at his press conference. Okay, we'll get that, and it'll cost you more next year. Fine. He don't have a problem with players betting on themselves, okay? Mm-hmm. That's the thing, if they're going to go through with it, because that benefits them. They thought they were going to get playoff Jimmy the whole year because he was going to be motivated contract year Jimmy, and said the only thing he also said
so, just so that we're clear.
Correct. But I think the difference is they trust Tyler's word. I don't think they trusted Jimmy's at a certain stage, and I think with good reason. So I think there's a comfort level between the two sides. But I'll just ask you this: if the Heat come to him with 3 years and 110, he's had an injury history. Didn't have it this year. He played 75 plus games. Much credit to him. But he's had an injury history. That's a lot of money. Okay, he'd be locked in with a team that he wants to play with till his late 20s, and then he'd have a chance to get additional money after that as the TV contract goes up. Okay, he can cash in again. He would only be like 28, 29 years old when this is over with. That's the case. Let's say that's the case the Heat makes to him. If you're Tyler, do you just roll the dice? You say, well, if you're not going to give me forget the full max. If you're not going to give me 43 a year, you're not going to give me 3 for 130. Okay, let's say 43 a year instead of the 3 for 150. But I'll give you a discount, right? Because here's the other point, and I want you to answer that question. But here's the other point. These are small differences relatively when we're talking about what Davion or Jovic or some of these other players could get or the Heat could offer him. But you're right. If you pay the guys at the top of your salary chart too much or too close to the top, then you can't pay these other guys. And so then $2 million does become a big deal because it's that $2 million that ends up pushing you over the second apron or making you a repeater tax team or all the rest of that stuff. And so that's why it does matter. Like every dollar matters. You can't just give Tyler an extra $2-3 million. No, because that's an extra $2-3 million. And now maybe you lose Jovic, okay? Or maybe you lose this guy that can help you. And that's how this works. There's only a finite amount of money. But let me ask you, again, we'll close with this and we'll do many more episodes on this. The Heat come to Tyler and they say, here, 3 for 110. I'll say 3 for 115. So just under 40. 3 for 115. Take your money, enjoy your family down here, live in South Florida, no state tax. You know we're going to take care of you. We know we value you. This will come back up when you're 28, 29, and we'll pay you again. What do you say?
If I'm Tyler, it's a compelling case, particularly with the injury history. And also because the NBA in general doesn't value Tyler's archetype in a certain way. Yeah. If he has a bad year, his earning potential can drastically drop in a way where like guys like Bam, because of the defensive chops and some of the other things that he does, like there's just a floor to like what Bam's going to get offered. Tyler's a totally different scenario. Like all of a sudden people could be saying he should get Jamal Crawford money from 2004. Like people get crazy about this kind of stuff. And Tyler's polarizing too. So there's a part of it where like I kind of feel like he probably would be smart to take it, but I know how Tyler thinks. And I think that what he said in the presser is right. It's going to cost him more. That's him saying, listen, because the Heat are going to say, listen, we'll pay you the money. We'll give you the contract, but you got to have another season like you had last year, and you got to have more playoff success. And Tyler's going to approach that with an open mind as a competitor to try to go get that done. The question is it smart to do that? And what happens with the rest of the roster moving forward? So we'll end on less than an answer and more of a question, in that can you afford to extend Tyler with the state of your current roster and where you are and your direction, the calculus on the time and how long it's going to take for all this to permeate and come together? Can you afford to pay Bam and Tyler a combined 100 million, 90 million per, and still field a competitive team? That's the big question.
I think if you're the Heat, you go to him and you say, here's 3 for 110. Jalen Brunson took less money in New York, gave them more flexibility. Jalen Brunson pays state tax in New York as much as anybody in the country, right? California, New York, etc. You don't have to pay that here. Well, you don't want to say that, okay? He's better than a lot of people, but you don't want to say that. You just say, no state tax. You get the weather down here. You get to live in Miami. You don't have to deal with everything you have to deal with in New York. I'm from New York, okay? So I can speak to this. You get all of that. You get everything that you get in Miami. You don't have to deal with another organization. 28, 29, we will revisit this. 3 for 110. I think if you're Tyler's agent, you come back and you say, okay, can we make it 3 for 115? And give me some of those garbage, unlikely to be earned incentives so the deal looks bigger again than it was the last time. And I think you close this. And I think, again, it comes back to injury history and archetype. I think you're right. Because Tyler maximized his archetype this year, right? But it's not a far fall to end up being Jordan Poole.
Yep. That was
He's
a better
much better
example. I went to Jamal Crawford. He was actually awesome. He shouldn't have caught a stray. I'm sorry.
But I'm saying, like, Jordan Poole, Tyler is a much better player than Jordan Poole. I said that from the very beginning, okay? But I'm saying you don't want to be – that's how quickly this thing can happen. And he has one more freak injury, which we've said most of these injuries not his fault, diving for a loose ball, other things that have happened, right? But if it happens again, you're right. Then all of a sudden you're in your mid-20s, late 20s, and you're not making that kind of money. It's not me. I'll never be in that kind of position. I was never in that kind of position. Nobody's going to pay me 1/100th of what Tyler makes for anything. But if I were his agent, I would say, give me an extra $5 million. Give me some of those incentives if you can even still do those. I don't even know. And let's call it a day and come back in 3 years. That's what I would do. It also would be a really, and again, not my money, but for a fan base that can be all over him, I think him coming in and taking what's perceived as a compromise deal, which is still a big raise, right? Because even if he takes 110, you're talking $7.5 million more, right, than he makes now per year. So that's essentially a 25% raise.
Yeah. If the Heat position it as we got to keep Davion and maybe trade for player X because Tyler did Y, I think fans would probably be pretty happy at that kind of
like they did for Dwayne and like they did for UD when they took less money. It's you never win over more fans than when you sacrifice yourself for the benefit of the team, and they can do it in a way where he still makes a lot of bank. That's the way I would look at it if I was his agent. It's not probably the way it's going to be looked at, because it's going to be looked at as he's an all-star and he deserves to get this amount of money. And I'm just saying, I think that's risky. I wouldn't bet against him because he's proven a lot of us wrong in the past, but it's risky. All right. Anyway, those are some of our discussions we had about these three guys. We'll do more as the summer goes on, as we head into the draft and into free agency. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, Someone needs to listen to my dad.